My name is Nadia. I was 34 years old the morning I stood in my parents' kitchen in Pearland, Texas, and watched my mother smooth her hands down the front of her apron like she was pressing out a crease that was never going to come out no matter how many times she tried. I had been on rotation in Midland for 5 months, 12-hour shifts, field work in the Permian Basin, the kind of job where your boots carry the work home with you no matter how many times you clean them. I had driven back the night before, gotten in late, slept in my old childhood room, and come downstairs that morning expecting coffee and nothing more demanding than a quiet Saturday. No reports, no site calls, nothing. There was coffee on the counter. I never got to it. My father was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine in that particular way he has when he already knows the room is about to be difficult. My sister Serena was in the chair against the wall, the one she has always claimed as hers when she visits, pulled close to the outlet so her phone stays charged while she sits there watching the room. She was wearing a silk blouse I had never seen before. Her nails were pale pink and freshly done. She looked, honestly, very composed for 8 in the morning. My mother was the one who started. She stood near the counter with her coffee cup held in both hands, and she said, "Nadia, we need to talk about your savings account, the one your father and I have the login for." I looked at her. I waited. "We used it," she said. "Most of it. For Serena, for the boutique space she found on Richmond Avenue." My father cleared his throat. "It was a limited window on the property. We didn't have time to ask you properly. You were in the field and we couldn't reach you at a moment's notice, and the landlord needed a decision." "How much?" I said. My mother looked at her coffee cup. 78,000. I opened my banking app. I already knew what I was going to see, but I needed to look at it anyway. The account I had given them temporary access to nearly a year ago showed a balance of $14,243. It had been $92,000 when I left for Midland in January. I read the number twice. Then I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. Serena looked up from her own phone and said, "You make good money, Nadia. You'll rebuild. That's just what you do." She said it plainly, no particular edge in her voice. She said it the way you might tell someone that a small inconvenience on the way to work wasn't really a problem because they're a capable driver. As if the $92,000 I had spent years building was a minor setback, not a plan, not a future, not the product of deliberate decisions I had made consistently, quietly, and without asking anyone for anything. I kept my face still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything right away. I sat there and felt the full weight of that sentence settle into the room around me. If you have ever worked quietly and carefully for years, building something that nobody around you ever stopped to ask about, and then had it reduced to almost nothing in a single morning while the people responsible looked at you with mild concern and mild inconvenience, you understand what that silence felt like. If any part of that is familiar to you, stay with me. There is much more to this story than what it looks like right now. What none of them knew, sitting in that kitchen that morning, was that the account they had emptied was not the one that held my actual plans. It hadn't been for some time. I'll come back to that. I had been a petroleum engineer for 6 years. I specialized in reservoir analysis, working for an energy company headquartered in Houston. My job was to evaluate extraction sites, manage production data, work with drilling teams on operational decisions, and write the kind of technical reports that end up in regulatory filings and investor presentations. It was not the kind of work that made for easy dinner conversation. Most people in my family had only a loose understanding of what I actually did day to day. My father sometimes told people I worked in oil, the way you might say someone works in food when they're actually the one running the kitchen, making every decision that keeps the entire operation going. The salary was solid from early on, but what I had learned quickly was that the real financial discipline came from what I did with the additional compensation. Retention bonuses, project completion payments at the end of long rotations, an employee stock purchase plan I had contributed to at the maximum amount every quarter for 5 years running, overtime differentials during extended field deployments. I was not a big spender. I drove a reliable 4-year-old car. My apartment in Houston was comfortable, but not extravagant. I cooked at home on most nights when I wasn't in the field. I did not take expensive vacations. I had no interest in keeping up with what anyone else was doing or spending. What I had, from the time I was 28 years old, was a separate investment account that I had opened quietly without mentioning it to anyone in my family. Not because I was hiding it from them in some calculated way, mostly because it had never come up naturally, and I had learned early that when money came up in that household, the conversation had a way of moving towards Serena, one way or another. By the morning I came downstairs to that kitchen, that investment account held just over $231,000. The savings account they had drained, the one with access, had been my buffer, the accessible fund I kept for planned expenses and emergencies, real money. 5 years of careful, consistent effort. Not a small thing, but not the thing. They had taken what they could see. They had no idea anything else existed. Serena was 31. She had a talent for making rooms feel like they were arranged around her. She had always been the one people noticed first, commented on first, photographed first at family occasions. Whether what they were expecting from her ever fully arrived was another conversation entirely. She had done a cosmetology certification at 22, a fashion resale account online that ran for a year and a half before going quiet, some time working for a friend's event company, which had ended in explanations that shifted depending on who was asking, half a real estate licensing course. In between each of these, my parents had helped. Consistently and quietly, they had helped, covering what needed covering each time, and I do not believe they ever said out loud, even to themselves, that a pattern was taking shape. I had never commented on any of it. I had learned long before this morning that pointing out patterns in that household did not produce clarity. It produced defensiveness, and then a conversation about how I was too focused on outcomes, too unwilling to see that people needed different kinds of support at different points in their lives. So I had kept my observations to myself and focused on my own work. What I had built alone. And I had never made a performance of it, partly because there was never anyone around who seemed genuinely curious about the details. My mother had never asked what I was saving toward. My father had never asked about my plans beyond the field rotation that was immediately in front of us. Serena had never, in 6 years, asked me a real question about my work. She knew I was an engineer. She knew I traveled for it. Beyond that, my life was something that existed in the background of whatever she was currently focused on. Nobody in that family had ever sat across from me and asked what I was building, and because nobody asked, nobody knew. I stayed at that table for another few minutes after Serena made her comment. My mother had moved to stand near the sink. My father was looking at his hands. Serena was back on her phone, just slightly, not enough to appear completely detached, but enough that you could see her attention had already moved on from the matter. She had said what she had to say. From her side of things, the conversation appeared to be winding down. My father said my name. Nadia, we genuinely thought you would understand. We thought you would want to help your sister get started. I stood up. I picked up my phone from the table. I pushed my chair back carefully and evenly. I need some air, I said. I went out through the back door and stood in the yard in the early morning heat. The neighborhood was already warm. A sprinkler was running somewhere down the block. I could hear birds in the old live oak at the back of the property, the one my father had always meant to trim and never gotten around to. I stood there for a long time, not crying, not calling anyone, not making any decisions out loud. I was thinking. I was being very still and very quiet and thinking carefully about exactly what I knew and what I was going to do with it. I stayed outside for about 20 minutes. Then I went back in and made myself a cup of coffee from the machine on the counter and sat back down at the table. Not because I had decided anything yet, but because leaving before I understood the full shape of what had happened would have been a mistake. My mother sat down across from me. My father poured himself more coffee. Serena was still in her chair by the wall, phone in hand, watching the room with that particular look of hers that manages to appear both engaged and completely elsewhere at the same time. My mother explained the sequence. Serena had found the commercial space in early March, a 1,200 square foot unit in a small mixed-use building on Richmond Avenue, in a neighborhood that had been turning over for a few years, the kind of block where a new coffee shop appeared every few months and a boutique had a reasonable chance of finding consistent foot traffic. The landlord wanted first month, last month, and a security deposit up front. Serena had some savings, not enough. She had come to my parents. They had helped her before, always from their own money, but this time what they had available wasn't close to what was needed. And my father knew the login. He had had it since the previous spring. I had given it to him before my first long rotation to Midland, 14 months earlier, because I had not been able to automate one specific bill payment in time, and I needed someone available in case the automated transfer failed. Just that one bill. I had written the login on a notepad page, handed it to him, and said to check the account if he got a paper notice in the mail. I had meant to revoke the access when I came back. I had forgotten. Another rotation had come, and I had not thought about it. My father said he had checked the account balance once, 2 months before I left for the second rotation, just to make sure the information still worked. He had not told me that at the time. He had not told me because there was nothing to tell, he said. He was just confirming it was current. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "So you knew what was in there?" He nodded, still not quite looking at me directly. That part one had not expected him to say out loud, but there it was. I want to be fair when I describe my father. He is not a cruel man in any obvious sense. He has never been directly unkind to me. He has always worked, always provided, always been present in the physical way, at the table, in the house, available if something needed doing around the property. But he has a way of being present without really seeing you, like you are part of the familiar furniture of his life, and familiar things don't require much closer inspection. My mother is warmer. She asks questions. She has always been the one to call on my birthday, to send the occasional check-in text when a rotation was running long, but her questions have always had a way of circling back to Serena eventually, the way water finds a slope whether you direct it or not. She would ask how the rotation was going, and I would begin explaining something real, something about the work or a problem I had spent a week solving, and she would listen with genuine attention for a few minutes before something else redirected her. A text from Serena, a concern she had about whether Serena was managing her finances that month. A memory of something funny Serena had said at a family dinner 3 weeks ago. I had grown up watching this, and it had shaped me in ways I didn't fully understand until I was in my late 20s. I had learned to be self-contained. I had learned that my progress was my own business, not a family project. I had learned not to wait for anyone to ask before I moved forward, because the asking rarely came. And I had learned, maybe most importantly, to keep the most significant parts of my life quiet until the moment was right, because announcing things before they were solid had never served me particularly well in that household. Serena had always operated differently. She had always expected the room to orient toward her, and for most of her life it had. She had the kind of energy that reads as magnetic when things are going well and becomes consuming when they're not. Our parents had moved between those two versions of her for 31 years, without ever quite landing on a different approach. Every failed venture had been absorbed without much examination. Every shortfall had been filled. Every explanation had been received with a careful, protective gentleness that I had honestly never seen applied to anything I did, because nothing I did had ever seemed to require that kind of management. I managed myself. I always had. The only time I remember my mother sitting across from me with that specific, quiet worry on her face was the day I told them I had accepted the job offer in Houston. I had just finished my master's degree in petroleum engineering. The offer was strong, from a company with a good reputation in the industry, for work that was genuinely aligned with my training. I sat at that same kitchen table and explained it. My mother had said, "But Houston is so far from home." My father had said, "Are you sure about the oil industry long term? It can be a difficult environment for a woman to advance in." I had said yes, I was sure. I said it once, clearly, and that had been the full extent of the conversation about one of the most significant decisions I had made in my life up to that point. Within 10 minutes, we had moved on to what Serena was doing for her birthday that coming weekend. In the 6 years that followed, I had built something real. I had been promoted from junior engineer to senior analyst to the field management role I held through the last Midland deployment. I had managed a team of 14 people during that rotation. I had authored 3 technical reports that were referenced in regional regulatory filings. I had presented twice at internal industry conferences the company hosted for its regional leadership teams. And for the past 2 years, I had been quietly building toward going independent. The consultancy plan had taken shape gradually, the way serious plans do, not as an impulse, but as a slow accumulation of clarity. I had worked long enough to understand where the real gaps existed in the industry. Smaller operators often needed specialized reservoir analysis on a project basis, the kind of work that required genuine expertise but didn't justify the cost of a permanent hire. There was consistent demand for independent consultants who could come in, do precise technical work, and deliver something the client could actually act on. I had been tracking the market for it. I had been having informal conversations with 2 former colleagues who had made that transition and were building something solid. The investment account, the one with $231,000 that nobody in my family knew existed, was the foundation of all of it. 12 months of operating runway. The buffer that would allow me to be deliberate rather than desperate when I made the move. The thing that meant I could take time to find the right first clients, instead of taking anything that came along. Nobody in that kitchen that morning knew any of this. Nobody had ever asked. In February, 3 months into the Midland rotation, I had been lying in my bunk one Sunday evening after a long shift when I scrolled through a series of social media posts I had been only half noticing for a few weeks. Serena had been posting about a boutique concept, mood boards, inspirational captions about taking leaps, images of herself standing in empty retail spaces with measuring tape and a coffee cup, captioned with things like "building something real" and "watch this space." One post had stayed with me longer than the others. It was a photo of Serena at a whiteboard, sketching out what looked like a floor plan, and the caption read, "When you have family truly in your corner, anything becomes possible." The comments were full of heart emojis and people tagging their own friends. My mother had liked it within minutes of it going up. I read that caption twice. Then I set my phone down on the bunk and looked at the ceiling. I did not have concrete proof of anything at that point. I had a feeling, and the feeling was quiet and specific, the kind I had learned over the years to take seriously. My family had a pattern. When something was needed for Serena, and the usual channels weren't enough, the path of least resistance was located and used. I had been, for most of my adult life, the path of least resistance. I was capable, I was fine, I would understand eventually. 3 days after seeing that post, I called my financial advisor. I asked her to review the investment account, confirm that the account holder documentation was completely current under my name only, and update my contact preferences so that all statements and alerts were going to a secondary email address that I had not shared with anyone in my family. She asked if everything was all right. I said yes. I said I just wanted to make sure everything was properly documented. She made the changes that afternoon and sent me a confirmation email. I saved it in a folder, put my phone in my pocket, and went back to the work in front of me. I had not told anyone about that call. I had not moved money around dramatically or made any visible protective gesture. I had simply ensured that the account that truly mattered was formally and cleanly protected, with current documentation, and that every notification from it would reach only me. That had been enough. As it turned out, that single phone call had been precisely enough. Because what they had done was take what they could see, the account with the login. The balance my father had verified was sitting there, $78,000, now gone into lease deposits and opening inventory for a boutique that was Serena's newest beginning. They had no idea what they had not touched. I sat at that kitchen table through most of that morning. My mother made eggs. My father ate quietly. Serena left around 10, hugging our mother at the back door and mentioning she had a meeting with a supplier. She waved in my general direction on her way out. Not a real goodbye, just a passing wave, the kind you give someone you expect to see again soon, someone whose feelings don't require much particular attention in the moment. I watched her walk out. I drank my coffee and thought about what kind of woman I was going to be in the weeks ahead, whether I was going to do what I had always done, which was absorb it quietly and keep moving, or whether this time I was going to let the truth be seen clearly. I had not decided yet, but something inside me had already shifted in a direction that was not going backward. I drove back to Houston on Sunday evening. My apartment was exactly as I had left it 5 months ago, a little stale from being closed up, a layer of dust on the kitchen counter. The plant by the window, the one I had asked my neighbor to water, had survived but barely. I watered it, opened the windows, and sat down on the couch with my laptop and the particular kind of quiet that comes after something significant has happened and you haven't yet decided what to do about it. I spent that first evening doing nothing. I ordered food. I watched something on television that I couldn't have described an hour later. I slept. The days that followed were strange in a specific way. I had taken 2 weeks of leave after the rotation, which I had been planning to use for rest. Now, that time felt different. I was home, but not settled. Present, but not at ease. I went through the motions of being on leave. Grocery shopping, calling a friend, going for walks along the bayou trail near my building, but underneath all of it, something was running that I couldn't entirely quiet down. I had not said much to my parents since Saturday morning. My mother had called on Sunday before I left Pearland. She asked if I was all right. I said I needed some time to think. She said she understood. She said she hoped we could talk more when I was ready. I said yes, of course, and left it there. I had not called Serena. What I had done on Sunday morning before I packed my car was sit at the small desk in my childhood bedroom and pull up my credit monitoring account on my phone. I had set up the service 3 years earlier, after a colleague had their identity used to open a utilities account in another state. It ran quietly in the background, sending alerts whenever something changed. There was one alert I had missed during the rotation. I had seen the notification in my email while I was in Midland, but had assumed it was routine, a soft inquiry from a financial institution doing a pre-approval offer, something harmless. I had not opened it. I opened it now. It was not a soft inquiry. It was a hard pull. A formal credit check initiated by a commercial lending company I did not recognize, dated 6 weeks earlier. Hard inquiries only happen when someone applies for credit. I had not applied for anything. I read the notification 3 times. Then I set the phone down on the desk and sat very still for about a minute. I pulled my full credit report. There it was, clearly listed. A hard inquiry from a commercial lender called Kessler Business Funding, dated the 14th of March. No corresponding new account had been opened under my name, which meant either the application had been denied, or it was still pending, or something had interrupted the process. I called the lender's customer service line that afternoon. I explained that I had a hard inquiry on my credit report from their institution that I had not authorized. The representative asked me to verify my identity, which I did, and then placed me on a brief hold. When she came back, she said the inquiry was associated with a small business loan application submitted in mid-March. The application had been submitted jointly with two applicants listed. One was a business registered in Texas, the other was my name, my legal name, my address, my social security number. I asked her to repeat that. She did. I asked her to note in the system that I was disputing the inquiry as unauthorized and that I had not consented to being listed on any application. She told me to submit a written dispute with supporting documentation. She gave me the address. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat at that desk for a long time after. The savings account had been one thing. That had been a misuse of access I had carelessly left in place. That was painful, and it was wrong, and it was going to be addressed. But there was at least an argument to be made, however poor, that it was a family matter involving trust that had been extended and abused. I had not loved that framing, but I could see the shape of it. This was different. This was my legal name used on a financial application without my knowledge or permission, my social security number, my credit history, pulled without my consent to support someone else's commercial venture. That was not a family misunderstanding. That had a specific legal name, and the name was fraud. I drove back to Houston that evening with a clarity I had not had that morning. In my apartment, over the next 4 days, I built a folder, not in a dramatic way, methodically, the kind of documentation that an engineer builds because she understands that a structure is only as solid as the records that support it. I printed the credit report with the unauthorized inquiry highlighted. I printed the dispute confirmation I had submitted to the lender in writing. I pulled the email notification from March and saved it with a timestamp. I called my bank and requested a complete transaction history for the drained savings account going back 18 months and had it sent in official format to my home address. I also requested written confirmation of when the access credentials were last used and from what device type, which the bank's fraud department was able to provide. Then I called the property management company that managed the Richmond Avenue building where Serena's boutique was located. I told them I was following up on a commercial lease and asked to confirm the names listed on the lease agreement. The leasing coordinator pulled it up. She read back the primary tenant name, which was Serena's boutique business registration. Then she said, "And the emergency guarantor listed is a Nadia." I stopped her. I said thank you and that I had what I needed. I hung up and sat with that for a moment. An emergency guarantor. My name had been placed on the lease as the fallback responsible party. If Serena defaulted on rent, could not meet her obligations, or abandoned the space, the landlord had my name on file as the entity to pursue. I had not signed anything. I had not agreed to anything. Someone had placed my name there the way you fill in a blank on a form when you need a number to complete the application. I did not call anyone in my family that night. What I did was call the attorney I had been referred to by a colleague the previous year, a woman named Claudette who handled civil matters with a particular focus on financial disputes. She was sharp, unhurried, and specific in the way that good attorneys are, the kind who asks 3 precise questions instead of 10 vague ones. I had spoken to her briefly before about a contract matter that had resolved itself, and I had kept her number because she had impressed me. I laid out the situation over 40 minutes, the savings account access and the withdrawal, the unauthorized credit inquiry, the lease guarantor listing, the full timeline from January through the present day. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me several questions about what I had documented, how I had obtained the information, and whether I had communicated any of this to the other parties. I said no. I had communicated nothing. She said good. She said to continue communicating nothing until we had spoken again. She said the situation had multiple actionable elements and that the documentation I had described was exactly the right foundation. She said she would do some preliminary research and we would speak again Thursday. I said fine. I thanked her. After that call, I made myself dinner and ate it at my kitchen table with the folder closed beside me. I did not call my mother. I did not text my sister. I went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept better than I had in 4 days. On Thursday, Claudette called me back. She confirmed what I had suspected on several counts. The unauthorized credit inquiry constituted a clear violation. The lease guarantor listing, if placed without my written consent, was similarly problematic and exposed me to real financial liability. The savings account withdrawal, while complicated by the fact that I had technically provided the access, still had actionable elements depending on how it had been represented to me when access was given. She told me we had enough to move forward in several directions. I told her I wanted to understand the full scope before we escalated anything. She said she understood, and that we could hold our position for a brief period, but that I should not let too much time pass. I said I understood. I said I would be back in touch shortly. That same evening, I received a message from Serena. Not a call, a text. It said, "Soft opening is Saturday the 22nd. Mom and Dad are coming. It would mean a lot if you came too. Fresh start." I read it once, fresh start, as if nothing had happened, as if we were simply two sisters who hadn't seen each other in a few weeks and needed to reconnect over white wine and boutique candles. I set my phone down on the counter and looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at the folder on the table. I thought about the text from Serena. I thought about the soft opening. I thought about the kind of event a boutique owner hosts when she is trying to build credibility with the local business community, not just family, potential suppliers, people who might extend her a line of trade credit. Perhaps a commercial banker or two she had been courting through her new business contacts. The kind of person whose opinion of the situation would matter in a very practical way. I thought about that for a while. Then I picked up my phone and texted Serena back. I said, "I'll be there." I put my phone in my pocket. I went to the folder. I opened it and looked through everything again, slowly, from the beginning. The bank transaction history, the credit report, the lender dispute confirmation, the notes from both calls with Claudette. Then I closed it, set it on the kitchen shelf, and went to make tea. I did not need to do anything dramatic on Saturday. I did not need to walk in with a speech prepared or a confrontation planned. I only needed to be there, with what I knew, in a room where the truth was going to have an audience whether anyone was expecting it or not. That was enough. That had always been enough. The boutique looked genuinely nice. I will say that. Serena had an eye for things like that. Always had. The space was painted in a warm cream with dark shelving units along the walls and a row of clothing racks down the center, each one spaced evenly with pieces arranged by color. There were small potted plants on the windowsill and a diffuser running something with eucalyptus in it. Soft music. A table near the back with wine and a cheese arrangement. Maybe 30 people in the room when I arrived, which for a soft opening of a boutique that had been open less than 2 weeks was a reasonable showing. I arrived at 6:15. I had dressed carefully, not overdressed, not casual, professional enough that I felt like myself. I had the folder in my bag, the printed documents in a plain manila envelope, and my phone with everything saved and organized. My mother was near the door when I walked in. Her face did something complicated when she saw me. Relief and worry mixed together in the particular combination that she has never been able to entirely suppress. She hugged me and said she was glad I came. I said hello and let her take my jacket. My father was near the cheese table. He found my eyes across the room and nodded once, the way men do when they want to acknowledge something without opening a conversation about it. I nodded back. Serena was in the center of it all, which was exactly where she was meant to be. She wore a deep green dress, her hair loose, her posture easy and confident. She was mid-conversation with a small group when I came in, and she saw me over someone's shoulder. Her smile shifted, almost imperceptibly, just a fraction of a second of recalibration, and then she said something to the group and moved toward me. She said, "You came." I said, "You asked." She hugged me briefly. Then she said, "I want you to meet some people," and drew me toward a small cluster near the back of the room. She introduced me to 2 women who were suppliers from a wholesale accessories company. a neighborhood business owner who had a home goods store 2 blocks down, and then to a woman standing slightly apart from the group with a glass of sparkling water and the particular attentiveness of someone who is professionally observing rather than socially relaxing. "This is Renee Okafor," Serena said. "She's with Meridian Commercial Bank. We've been talking about a business line of credit for expanding inventory." Then she gestured toward me with the ease of someone used to this kind of introduction. "And this is my sister Nadia. She works in oil." Renee Okafor looked at me and extended her hand. She said, "Nadia, which company are you with?" I told her. Her expression changed in a way that was specific and immediate, not dramatically. But the professional register shifted, the way it does when someone moves from polite small talk to genuine recognition. She said, "I manage several commercial accounts in the energy sector. I know your company's regional team. You're in reservoir analysis?" I said yes. "Field management, Permian Basin operations for the past 2 years." She said she had seen reporting from our division cited in a project risk assessment for one of her clients. She mentioned the specific type of analysis. She mentioned the file designation, which was not public, but was known within a narrow professional circle that included commercial lenders working with energy sector clients. I said yes, that sounded like our work. We talked for a few minutes, genuinely and specifically. She asked about the methodology we used for production forecasting. I explained it in plain terms. She asked a follow-up question that showed she understood the answer. Serena stood slightly to my left with her wine glass, and I could feel without looking at her that the conversation had drifted somewhere she had not anticipated. After a few minutes, Renee said, "Can I ask you something directly?" I said yes. She said, "I do standard background checks before meeting with new clients. It's part of our process." She paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who does this for a living and understands the weight of what she is about to say. "One of the preliminary checks we ran flagged a discrepancy. In the original loan inquiry that came through for this business, there was a co-applicant listed, but that co-applicant's information didn't appear in the formal documentation when the application was pulled." She looked at me steadily. She was not asking a question exactly. She was giving me the opportunity to confirm something she had already begun to understand. I said, "Was my name listed as the co-applicant?" She said it was. "Your full legal name and a social security number consistent with your identity profile." I said, "I didn't submit that application. I didn't authorize anyone to use my information. I discovered the inquiry 6 weeks after it was filed when my credit monitoring service flagged it. I submitted a written dispute to your institution's fraud department 2 weeks ago." Renee's posture straightened slightly. She was already reaching for the small notebook she had in the pocket of her blazer. Serena said, quietly and quickly, "Nadia, this isn't the time or place for this." I turned and looked at her. I said, "You used my name on a loan application without asking me. You put my name on the lease as a guarantor without telling me. You and your parents used access I gave for a single bill payment to withdraw $78,000 from my savings while I was in the field for 5 months. I kept my voice low and even. The people immediately around us had gone still. What exactly is the right time and place? The room had not stopped entirely, but it had quieted in that particular way rooms do when something serious surfaces in a social setting and the people nearby are trying to determine whether to look or to look away. My mother had come closer without me noticing. She was standing a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her. Marcus, Serena's boyfriend, appeared from somewhere near the clothing racks. He positioned himself beside Serena in the way people do when they are deciding whether a situation needs managing. I opened my bag. I took out the manila envelope and removed the printed pages calmly, the way you remove documents you have prepared and organized with care. I separated them and held them plainly, not waving them, not performing with them, just holding them so they were visible. The first was the credit report printout with the Kessler Business Funding Inquiry clearly marked and dated. The second was the written dispute confirmation with the reference number and the date I had filed it. The third was the savings account transaction history showing the withdrawal amount and the date it was processed. The fourth was the page from the lease document showing my name in the guarantor field. Renee had her notebook open. I said to my parents, I want to show you something else. I opened my phone. I navigated to my investment account, not the savings account they had drained. The other one, the one I had been building quietly for 6 years, the one no one in this family had ever known about because no one had ever thought to ask what I was actually doing with my time and my career and my discipline. $231,412. I held the screen toward my parents so they could see it clearly. My mother's hand went to her mouth. I watched her process the number. I watched her look from the phone to my face and back to the phone. My father sat down. He lowered himself onto one of the small chairs Serena had arranged near the front display. He sat as if the air had left him. I said, "You thought you took everything I had built. You took what you could see, but I had been building something for 6 years that none of you ever asked about. Not once. Not ever." Serena was staring at the phone. Her face was doing things she was not controlling anymore. The composure she had walked into this evening with was gone, not loudly, just quietly, and completely gone. Marcus said, "Look, there was a miscommunication about how the application was filed. We can address all of this." Renee looked at him once, clearly and briefly, and then looked back at her notebook. She said to me, "I'm going to need to flag this internally. The co-applicant discrepancy is something our compliance team will need to review." I said that was fine. I said I had already been in contact with legal counsel and would be happy to provide documentation through that channel. Marcus stopped talking. The two women from the wholesale company had stepped back toward the clothing racks. The neighborhood business owner had found something to look at in the other direction. The other guests were moving in the careful way people move when they have understood that something real is happening and they are not sure of their role in it. Serena said, "Nadia, please." I looked at her. She was asking me to stop, to smooth it over, to do what I had always done, absorb it and adjust, and let the room return to normal so that her evening could continue, and her business contacts would leave with a good impression, and the whole thing could be quietly managed later in a kitchen somewhere. I had absorbed things in that family for a long time. I had made myself small and self-contained and easy to overlook because it had always been simpler than the alternative. I had built an entire financial foundation that no one knew about because no one had ever cared enough to ask. I was not absorbing anything else. I put the documents back into the envelope. I put the envelope back into my bag. I said, "My attorney's contact information will come to you through formal channels. All parties." I looked at my mother once. She was still standing with her hand partially raised near her chest, as if she was not sure whether to reach toward me. I said, "I love you, Mom, but I'm done protecting people from the consequences of what they chose to do." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair near the door where my mother had placed it. I put it on. I walked out of the boutique and onto the street, where the early evening air was warm and the block was still active with people moving in and out of other shops. I did not look back through the window. I walked to my car, got in, and sat for a moment in the quiet. Then I started the engine, merged into the Richmond Avenue traffic, and drove home. My phone started ringing before I had been home for an hour. My mother called 4 times between 9 and 11 that night. I let each call go to voicemail. I did not listen to the voicemails until the next morning, and when I did, I sat with a cup of coffee and listened to all 4 in sequence without stopping. The first was confusion. She said she didn't understand what had happened at the boutique and that she thought we should talk. The second was worry. She said she was concerned about where things were going and she hoped I was all right. The third was quieter. She said my name once and then was silent for a few seconds and then said she hadn't known about the loan application, that she and my father had not known about that part. The fourth was the one I kept. She said, "I think we didn't see you clearly for a long time, and I'm sorry for my part in that." She didn't say it perfectly. There was still a note of hoping I would call back and make things easier for everyone, but she said it, and she meant the part she meant, and I held on to that. My father sent a text the following Tuesday. It was 3 sentences. He said he had not understood the full scope of what Marcus had arranged with the loan application. He said he was speaking with someone about the financial situation. He said he hoped I would give him the chance to explain properly at some point. I read it and did not respond immediately. I filed it in the back of my mind and kept moving. Serena was silent for the first week. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then on a Wednesday evening, 11 days after the soft opening, a long message arrived. I read it once. It covered a lot of ground. It said I had humiliated her in front of people who mattered to her professionally. It said she had worked hard for the boutique and I had undermined it before it had a real chance. It said she understood there were things that needed to be addressed, but that I had chosen the worst possible way to address them. It said she needed space, and she expected I did too. It did not say she was sorry. I did not reply to that message. There was nothing in it that required a reply. Claudette filed the formal demand letter to all named parties 11 days after the soft opening. It laid out the unauthorized withdrawal of funds, the fraudulent use of my personal information on the loan application, and the lease guarantor listing placed without my written consent. It specified the total amount being sought and gave a 30-day response window. It also notified all parties that a complaint had been filed with the relevant financial regulatory body regarding the loan application. Meridian Commercial Bank's compliance team had already begun their internal review by the time the demand letter went out. Renee had flagged the co-applicant discrepancy the night of the soft opening, as she had said she would. The review took 3 weeks. At the end of it, the bank formally declined Serena's application for the business line of credit. The denial letter cited irregularities in the original inquiry documentation. It was polite and impersonal and final. Without that credit line, Serena had planned to bring in a second round of inventory for the boutique's first proper season. The space had been stocked lightly for the soft opening, mostly consignment pieces and a small wholesale order she had managed to fund through what remained of her own savings. The expanded inventory she needed to operate at the scale the Richmond Avenue rent required was not going to materialize without external financing. She had been counting on Meridian. When that closed, she approached 2 other lenders. Both pulled her credit report. The hard inquiries from the original application and the compliance flag attached to her business registration made both conversations short. By the end of the 3rd month, she had missed 1 rent payment on the boutique space. The landlord sent notice. She covered it with money I later learned she had borrowed from a friend. The 2nd month, she was short again. Serena's attorney responded to Claudette's demand letter with a counter-proposal that was, in Claudette's words, not serious. We rejected it. Marcus had become a separate matter by that point. The bank's compliance investigation had identified him as the individual who had submitted the original loan inquiry using my information. The regulatory complaint I had filed triggered a separate review. He retained his own attorney. He was no longer spending time at the boutique, from what I understood through the occasional second-hand information that reached me. Whether that had broken between him and Serena or simply become complicated, I did not know and did not pursue. My parents agreed to the settlement terms 6 weeks after the demand letter went out. The agreement structured repayment of the full $78,000 over 30 months, with a small amount of interest, and included a formal acknowledgement of the unauthorized nature of the withdrawal. My father had liquidated a portion of his retirement savings to contribute the initial payment. I had not asked him to do that. It was his decision. Claudette reviewed the agreement and said it was solid. I signed it. Removing my name from the lease guarantor position took a formal notice from Claudette to the property management company, a copy of a signed declaration that I had not authorized the listing, and about 2 weeks of back and forth. They removed it. The landlord was not pleased. That was not my problem. I changed every login credential attached to any financial account I held. I set up new notifications, new security questions, new everything. It took an afternoon, and it felt, when it was done, like closing a window that had been left open for too long. Not dramatic, just clean. An aunt called in week 3, a woman on my mother's side who has always considered herself a neutral party and has never, in my experience, been particularly neutral. She told me that family needed to find a way through things together. She said I had to consider what my father's health could handle at his age. She said Serena had always been fragile in ways that weren't always visible. I listened to the full call without interrupting. Then I said, "I appreciate you calling." And I ended the conversation. I did not call her back. The boutique closed at the end of month 5. Serena gave up the lease before the landlord could pursue formal default proceedings. She moved her remaining inventory to a storage unit. The last I heard through a mutual connection was that she was considering an online-only model for the brand, which was something she could do from home without the overhead. Maybe that would work for her, maybe it wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer something I was being asked to absorb. I registered my consultancy LLC in October, 3 months after coming home from Midland, the name I had been sitting with for 2 years. The filing was quiet and official, and mine. I got the confirmation email on a Tuesday afternoon and read it at my kitchen table with coffee, and then filed it in the folder I had started keeping for the business. My first client was an independent operator in the Permian Basin, a small company that needed a production feasibility report for a new site. A former colleague had referred them. The engagement took 6 weeks, and they paid on time and said they would be back. The second client came through a contact from one of the internal conferences I had presented at. By the end of the year, I had 4 active clients and a 5th in conversation. The $231,000 was still largely intact. I had spent a portion on the LLC setup, initial equipment, and professional liability insurance. The rest remained where it had always been. My foundation, my runway, still mine. I spoke to my mother every week or two through all of this. Not long calls, not easy ones at first, and then gradually easier. She was trying in the way that people try when they have understood something too late and are not sure how to close the distance. I was not rushing her, and I was not rushing myself. Some things take the time they take. My father and I had one real conversation in December, on the phone, about 40 minutes. He talked more than he usually does. He said some things that I think were genuinely hard for him to say. I listened. I did not give him more than the conversation was ready for, but I did not give him less either. Serena and I had not spoken since the message she sent 11 days after the soft opening. I did not know when that would change, or whether it would. I had stopped holding the question open the way you hold a door for someone who may or may not be coming. I had simply let it rest. There is something I understand now that I did not know how to name when I was standing in that boutique holding those documents. It is this: the people who used me were not monsters. They were people who had looked at me for a long time and decided, not consciously, but in the accumulating way of years and habits and small choices, that I was the member of the family who could handle things, who would be fine, who would absorb what needed absorbing and keep going. They had made that decision so many times, so automatically, that they had stopped seeing me as someone with a separate interior life, with plans they didn't know about, with a future I had been quietly, carefully building in the hours and years when none of them were watching. They had not asked because they had not needed to ask. I had always been there. I had always been fine. The thing I stopped doing was making it easy to keep not asking. It is March now, 8 months since I came home from Midland. I am sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning with coffee and my laptop open to a client report I am finishing before the week starts. The folder with the legal documents from last year is in the file drawer in my office, behind the folders for the consultancy. My phone is on the counter on silent. The plant by the window has fully recovered. It is green and even a little overgrown. I am not waiting for anyone to call. I am not waiting for anything.